everyone, and welcome to CL3, the L's of Caregiving. This is your host, AJ, and I survived another day of caregiving. And if you're listening, so did you, because we're all caring for someone, right? And hopefully, we're caring for ourselves too. So, congratulations. And just in case you haven't heard it lately, you are doing a good job, and I am proud of you. Thanks so much for listening. All right, so it has been quite a while since I did episode one. My intention was not for it to be this long until I recorded episode two, but honestly, the last 4 weeks have just been a unrelenting whirlwind of appointments and decisions and new medications and traveling from here to there and a few funerals from deaths in the family. And there has just been a lot going on. And so I apologize that there is such a big gap between these two episodes. But hey, that is indeed the life of a caregiver. So after episode one, I spoke about the time that things really changed in summer of last year when my father was diagnosed with metastatic cancer, and then 2 days later my mom ended up having multiple strokes. If you missed kind of the ins and out of all of that happening, please go back and listen to the first episode, the intro to CL3. And so today, as promised, I'm going to talk more about kind of how the day to day worked when all of that happened back in summer of 2024, and kind of what that time period was like for each of us. For me as a caregiver, and also how my parents were doing and how they were processing um, what they were going through each day. So I can tell you that, those first couple of days um, in the hospital with both parents felt like an eternity. Um, those first couple of days, I wasn't really sure what to do, what was happening. I think I was just numb um, to everything that was occurring, but also fully knowing and understanding that I needed to be on my A game. I needed to be able to advocate for both of my parents. And then also, I needed to, or I wanted, I should say, um, to make sure I was comforting them as well, to let both of them know that they were not alone. Um, and to do everything I could to uh, help them feel or resist the feeling that they were being a burden on me. I did not want them to feel that. I wanted them to instead just feel cared for, um, and that I was by their side in what they were going through. Um, so I did, try when they first said they were admitting my mom. I did try my best to see if it was somehow possible for her to be admitted to the room next to my dad or on the same hallway. Unfortunately, that was not possible simply because in many hospitals and in the one they were in, if you are a stroke patient or a heart patient, they have special floors that are considered a neuro floor or a neuro wing, a heart floor or a heart wing. And so there was a special floor that my mom needed to go to, which was one floor down from my dad. And so, at the end of the day, it was only a short elevator ride to get between the two of them, which, because of the circumstances, that's, really the best I could ask for at that point. I try, even in the worst of circumstances, to count my blessings. And the blessing for me to count in that moment is at least they were in the same hospital. I was not driving back and forth, from across town to get from one hospital to the other. Um, so a short elevator ride between the two of them, I was still very appreciative of that. Um, and so, essentially what I would do is a lot of doctors make their rounds in the morning times. There are some, specialist doctors that round in the afternoon, I guess. I'm assuming after they've done surgery or whatever it was that they did for that morning, then they do their rounds in the afternoon. Um, and so I would typically start off in my mom's room because I noticed that her doctors were coming earlier. But I also spoke to the nursing staff for both my mom and dad, and I would explain to them, hey, I'm just downstairs in my mom's room, or I'm just upstairs in my dad's room. Can y'all let the doctors know so that if they come, I can just head downstairs or head upstairs to make sure I'm there. Um, and also a lot of times my parents would call me on the phone and say, hey, Dr. Such and such is here. I have asked if he will wait 60 seconds, for you to come. And why do I do that? Well, we learned many years ago that, although I do feel most doctors have absolute, best intention, um, I do feel that many doctors got into healthcare to help. Um, and to attempt to facilitate healing process for those who are sick. Despite that, the healthcare system as a whole is not necessarily always working well and always working well for the patient. And so because of that, we have learned that someone has to advocate. And oftentimes when you are the one that is sick and not feeling your best, especially if you are tired or overwhelmed, you really end up relying on someone else to be that person to advocate for you. And so I am that person for my parents. I make sure that when they are not feeling well, that I am there to advocate. Um, just for their needs, to advocate for even their wants, and to make sure that they are not um, being looked down on, not being spoken to in a certain way. Um, Unfortunately, it is a truth in the healthcare field that some patients can be treated differently depending on what doctor you have and what experiences those doctors hold. And so it was very important to me to make sure that I was in the room, um, or at the very least on the phone, each time a doctor came by for either my mom or my dad, just to make sure that I was involved in advocating and asking questions, making clarifications, etc. So that is kind of how I handled going back and forth um, between them as far as meeting with the doctors. And then normally I would swap out. So if I've spent, the first 2 hours with my mom that morning, I would then swap out and go spend a couple of hours with my dad, making sure that um, I helped with ordering his meals. My mom is very good at knowing exactly what she wants. She actually worked in nutrition for years, so she knows, what's going to be healthy for her depending on what issues she's dealing with. And so she really does not need my help at all. My father is different. My father asks my mom every day, what are you going to eat? What should I have? And so he very much wants help when it comes to, them bringing a menu by and trying to figure out what he should have. And even if it's a clear liquid diet that he was on, and then they advanced it from there, but still just wanting help with, what flavor Jello do you think I would like? And so I would go and do that, spend a couple hours in his room, um, and then typically, uh, after the first 4 hours, I would try to go and have lunch, a nice salad from the salad bar. I would go sit outside on the bench and just breathe fresh air and just tell myself, okay, half of the day is down. You can make it, until whatever time I gave myself for that day. Um, and so sometimes I would say, okay, I'm going to give myself until 6 p.m. and then it's going to be time to head home. Or, maybe today I feel like I'm going to make it until 7 p.m. and then it's going to be time to head home. And so that's what I would do. I would, tell myself, okay, you got this, 4 more hours, 5 more hours, whatever the case may be. And then I would head back up and do it all again. So whoever I was with last, I would go to the other parent's room and spend a few hours, um, and then swap back out. And honestly, I was exhausted. Um, I'm sure this sounds exhausting, spending the whole day in the hospital, talking to doctors and nurses and asking questions for just one person is exhausting. Doing it for two was extremely exhausting. Um, and there were even a few times, honestly, where I would get off the elevator and my intention would be to go to my mom's room, but then I get off the elevator and realize that I'm on the floor for my dad's room. And so there were kind of exhaustion filled moments where, I would forget kind of where I was going, or be in the elevator and I would be pushing four, and why is the elevator not moving? And it's because I'm already on four, and really I need to be going to the fifth floor this time. So, sometimes exhaustion would really overtake me. Also, during this time, a lot of tests were being run on both parents. So for my mom, obviously, there were multiple MRIs. They were doing a lot of blood work daily to check on her heart. I believe it was troponin that they were monitoring, which was high. Um, and so just overall doing a lot of tests on her to make sure she was going to be stable before they attempt to discharge her. When it came to my dad, by this point, even though um, the small bowel obstruction that we originally came to the ER for, even though that had pretty much resolved, there was still the matter of, okay, we have this other um, suspicion of cancer, and we really need to do a biopsy in order to make sure that what we're seeing or what we're thinking we see is accurate. And so, unfortunately, that meant a liver biopsy. And, I have never had a liver biopsy before, but it just looked and sounded like it was going to be painful. And my father does not like pain. And I mean any pain, even a pinch. He is extremely pain averse, okay? He does not like pain. And so trying to calm him in anticipation of this liver biopsy was almost, a whole second job. And by the way, I haven't mentioned that while I'm doing all of this, I am working from home. Um, I have my laptop. I am lugging it back and forth between floors. I am making phone calls, answering emails, I'm taking care of different tasks. I am doing all of that for 8 hours while bouncing back and forth between two of them, which of course adds to my exhaustion. Um, but yes, trying to calm and explain that, even though it's going to hurt, that this liver biopsy is an absolute necessity in order for them to fully and properly diagnose what they were suspecting. That was a very difficult task. Um, in the end, I did get my father to understand that, this test was important and that it really needed to be done. Um, and he did have it done. And yes, it was painful. Um, and even days after that, a couple of weeks really, that area was still tender and he was still, um, complaining of the pain. And so, kind of difficult. I'm sure those of you that have children, can understand and agree. It is very difficult to see, someone that you love dealing with a level of pain that, there's not really much you can offer them in way of help. And so it was difficult to see how much that biopsy caused him pain. Um, but ultimately recognizing that it did need to be done. And so obviously, I think I said in episode 1 that, my dad is currently battling cancer. So you should be able to figure out that the biopsy did come back positive. Um, Everything that they originally suspected from the CAT scan was true. And now here's where things, got interesting, is that somehow after the biopsy, as soon as my father started eating soft foods, the small bowel obstruction that was there came back. And this time they were thinking that the presence of the cancer was actually causing the bowel obstruction. And so once they shifted to that thinking, there was almost an instant belief that, okay, well, we can resolve it now, but it's probably just going to come back a few days later, just like it did this time. And it may just keep doing that over and over. And so the conversation really shifted to, I need to make some long term decisions. I need to be looking into hospice care. I need to be, deciding and having those discussions that palliative care wanted us to have when we initially found out about the potential for this diagnosis. Um, and so that was very difficult because, you know, honestly, I just wanted to deal with what was in front of us because we have not been given the biopsy results at that point. The biopsy had just been done, and I believe it was the next day when the small bowel obstruction came back. Um, and so ultimately, they ended up repeating the same fix from the first time, which was just to give him a medication, allow it to dissolve, and then that obstruction was cleared after just a couple of days. And then starting him again on the clear liquid diet, advancing it from there, rinse and repeat. Um, so, I was thankful that the second, I guess, bout with the obstruction, um, did not require any type of surgery, just like last time. But I was very distraught about, the things they were telling me to think about and the decisions that they said would need to be made. Um, Very difficult to face that. And then, obviously, as I said, we did not have the actual biopsy results yet. So then, how can I make this big decision that I'm being urged to make without the full picture in my hand, so to speak? Um, and so I was very adamant, honestly, that no, I am not signing up for hospice. I am, uh, you know, I'm thankful that palliative care exists. I think they do very important work. But that is not what I'm going to focus on um, right now until I know exactly what we are dealing with. And so um, that was, I believe, I don't know if it was difficult or alarming. I'm not sure I can, accurately speak to what the healthcare staff was thinking, when I was giving them these answers, but I could definitely tell that there was a level of, maybe them thinking that I'm just in la la land and, not willing to face the hard facts. But that's the thing about hard facts is that they are based on facts. And so to me, the facts were, what are the results of this biopsy? Because I don't want to make these decisions based on what we think. I need to make them based on what we know. Um, and so I think it took about a week before, and they kept my dad in the hospital, by the way, this entire time. Um, I guess because of the second obstruction, and they just wanted to be sure. But they kept him in the hospital while we waited for this entire week to finally get the biopsy results. And by the way, we did not get those until I started hounding, um, because I could see in his my chart, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, no matter what hospital system you attend, because of that law that was passed. I think it's the Health and Transparency Act. Don't quote me, I may be completely butchering the name, but I know that um, hospital records, visits, and all of that are made available to patients using some type of health portal. And so I could see on his portal that his results had been back for several days. And every day I was, thinking an oncologist or someone is going to come by and give us these results. And every single day, no one mentioned them. And so at some point I said, okay, enough is enough. Somebody needs to tell us, like, what are the results of this biopsy? Because I can see them, but I have no idea what this is saying, and I need someone who specializes in this to explain. And the hospitalist himself did not even want to go into the results. He was very adamant that he wanted an oncologist to do it, and just to keep waiting, and he would make sure that an oncologist visited us that day, and then that day became the next day, and then 2 days later, I was growing more adamant that, hey, someone needs to tell us something. Um, and so, but by the way, throughout all of this waiting, I was still being asked to meet with palliative care, asked to um, start the hospice process, all of these things that I'm continually being asked to do, which, hey, if those decisions have to be made, I just want them to be based on um, a full picture and not a partial picture. And so I stayed very adamant that no, we need to speak to someone. Um, and so an oncologist finally ended up calling me, and thankfully, it was an oncologist that worked on the team that treated my father previously. As I said in episode one, my dad is a cancer survivor. Um, and I will talk in a previous, or sorry, I will talk in an upcoming episode about his first bout with cancer, um, and how it led to where we are today. But very thankfully, someone on that same oncological staff was the one to get back to me and go over the results. And in talking to him, he said, number one, he really wanted to bring us in office to wait until my dad got out of the hospital, um, to wait until he got a little stronger. He had lost some weight after the bowel obstructions. I believe he had been in the hospital for about 2 weeks, maybe a little over 2 weeks at this point. His body had been deconditioned some, and so he really, you know, felt strongly that he needed to get some of his strength back, get back moving, and get out of the hospital. And then he would bring us in the office and he would tell the results to him, on his own. However, just to make sure that I kind of had a picture of what was happening, he did explain that yes, it was cancer stage 4, that it was metastatic. He explained, how it could have come back. Um, and then ultimately he told me, but don't worry about it. He said, there is not a cure, but there is a treatment that I'm fairly confident that your father would be eligible for, and that would also work on him. And so I was very thankful for that conversation, because, although it was not great news, it was also not um, impossible news. It was okay. We have this terrible thing happening, but there is a plan, and so that was what I focused on for the next, I believe it was 2 weeks until we got him out of the hospital and were able to take him to the doctor's office. Um, Now, one thing that I'm not sure everyone would agree with, but this is what I did, and I'm just going to be honest about it, is that, my husband, my mom, my sister, and we knew the full conversation from the oncologist. But for my dad, I did follow the oncologist's advice, which was I did not give him the results. I waited for him to get out of the hospital, get strong enough to kind of move around on his own, get some of the weight, the pounds that he had lost back on him. And then I waited until we could visit the oncology office in person, for him to receive the results. And he did ask a couple of times during the 2 weeks from when I spoke to the oncologist. And both times I just told him, hey, Dad, the oncology office said, they're going to bring us in on this date and they're going to give you the results in person. And I did stick to that. And I'm sure, he was wondering and wanting to know the results. Um, but I also did think there was prudence behind what the oncologist was saying, just to, have him kind of recover and not have this big extra worry on him. I'm sure there was already worry just from the fact of having the biopsy. Um, but just, trying to hopefully allow him to focus on getting a little bit stronger and getting out of the hospital, before we start climbing this new mountain that we were going to have to climb. And so that was how, the day to day went. Um, uh, uh, I would say about a week before my father was discharged, um, my mom's test started coming out more clear. They had gotten her to a more stable place, and they felt that, she would be able to go home, with home health care visits from physical therapy and nursing. And so it was funny because they actually discharged my mom from her hospital room down to my dad's hospital room, which was hilarious to see the discharge people just kind of roll her from one floor to the other. Um, but then once I got her home, it presented a new challenge of okay, now one is home and one is in the hospital. And I'll talk more next time, kind of about how I was able to navigate that and then what happened after we ultimately were able to bring my dad home. So that's all for today. I'm really thankful for those of you that took the time to listen. I hope you come back next week to hear more. Feel free to leave comments or questions below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And I hope you'll join me next time on the CL3 podcast. Much love, AJ.